We can speak Chinese if you want. As you wish. Yeah. But I think French would be the version. Which one was it? And what kind of it was it?
No, and that was like indirected to you at all. I was just like, like the German people in Mallorca. I was so excited about what one week and I was there. Somebody in the space was like behind me, but like that's actually not my fault. Yeah. That's what for me is all the time when it rains and then it's like, oh, I'm so sorry that it rains. My friend Paris is like this. I'm so sorry that it's so cold. Like, yeah, it's Ottawa and then yeah, well, Oh, and then I know the story since years. And I didn't know this. That's pretty good. Yeah. Anything about it? There's wrong or like somebody like you're to buy it, that's really tough. It's easy to find. If it's just you, you would expect it to like to search in Gmail. Yeah. Hello, good morning. Morning. Morning, good morning.
And then Jeremy Lewin, Undersecretary for Foreign Assistance, Humanitarian Affairs, and Religious Freedom. So, Ambassador Waltz.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. Good to see everyone. Good morning. And really thrilled to be joined by both undersecretaries here. And thank you, Jeremy, in particular, for coming up to New York today. So we're quite excited to talk with you all today about taking the next step in United Nations reform, in restoring America's leadership and bringing accountability, in bringing oversight, and bringing transparency to how American tax dollars are being used for humanitarian aid. And I want to stress, in particular, for humanitarian life-saving aid. These funds are for victims of natural disasters, for tsunamis, for earthquakes, for famine, people who are truly in critical need. And how we deliver that, how we're changing how we deliver that, with the United States remaining by far as the most generous nation in the world, not only through this aid, but of course we can't ever forget the hundreds of billions in private sector aid that go through foundations, charities, philanthropies, and other means. Here at the U.S. mission to the United Nations, we've been taking action with this guidance on, as you know, and with these fine individuals, in December of last year, we signed a historic memorandum of understanding that announced $2 billion in pooled funding to drive reforms through the humanitarian reset that Undersecretary Fletcher has been leading. Our this collaboration on reform reflects President Trump's priorities for the UN and helping it reach its potential. His mandate to us is to help the institution reform and help it achieve that potential. We found that when the UN does what it does best, delivering humanitarian aid in remote, difficult locations at scale with a reliable and affordable supply chain, it can and does succeed. It's only then, when the organization strays from its core mission, that it tends to not perform nearly as well as it should. So we're here to support its success. And because of the clear commitment to reform and the achievements so far, funds will save more lives around the world, but also drive forward the reforms that we put in place for efficiency, accountability, and lasting impact. This isn't the end to our efforts. In fact, it's just the latest step. We still have a lot of work to do, again, to be completely candid, to address the bloat that often undermines the United Nations mission. We have already achieved just this year the first regular budget cut in the history of the United Nations, reducing overhead, even drawing down some peacekeeping missions, many of which have been around 20, 30, 40 years. They've gone on too long or have been unable to actually achieve their mandate. Or in many cases, what the peacekeeping commanders told us was to address poorly performing units. So we've put the focus back, this is more broadly speaking, on achieving real results, and most importantly, attaining peace and saving lives. So to give you a sense of the progress we've made, I think we will hand this over to Tom Fletcher to share his views from inside the UN system. Undersecretary Lewin will discuss in greater detail our vision for humanitarian funding going forward. I just want to emphasize again, there's this narrative out there we're announcing here today will result in more cents on every dollar actually getting to people in need. And that's something, that's a shared goal we should all have. I can tell you our constituents, it's their money, the American taxpayer, that's certainly something we should be able to look them in the eye and say, this money is being used as efficiently and effectively as possible to save lives around the world. So with that, I will hand over to you, Tom.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador Waltz, and thank you, Undersecretary Lewin, for being here today, and thank you for not just being here in presence, but as such a key supporter for this life-saving work that lies ahead of us. Those of you who $1 billion, which, as I said at the time, was less than 1% of what the world would spend on guns and arms and security. It's less than half of what Wall Street spent on bonuses a few weeks ago. It's a fraction of what we spend on fizzy drinks or bottled water in places where we have access to fresh water itself. An ambitious plan, but one that we had fully prioritized, costed, and which we are determined as a humanitarian community to deliver. And I said at the time that we were balancing three key aspects of this work. Firstly, to retain our principles and our values around impartial, neutral, life-saving work. Secondly, to reform the humanitarian system as we go along for the new realities that we face. And thirdly, to get out there and raise the money that we need in a period when there is less money around for humanitarian action. As you've heard me say many times, we are facing rising needs. Over 300 million people need our support, and we're facing declining global funding. And we are, as a result, overstretched, under-resourced, for full accountability, full investigations, and we expect member states to protect our work wherever we are. So, as I said, we have a plan. And on the 28th of December, Undersecretary Lewin and I came together in Washington to announce a tranche of US funding, generous US funding, $2 billion to that plan. And you'll hear me say something now that you've never heard me say before, and fundraising for that $23 billion, and up to this point, In advance of the announcement that you've just heard, we've raised $7.38 billion from 65 member states, plus other public and private sources of funding. We're grateful for all of that support. But the most important number that I have of, and that we should celebrate. How did we do this with the first tranche of US funding? So that contribution provided us a lifeline at a crucial moment when the sector was facing huge cuts and was at breaking point, with supply chains fracturing and partners' operations at severe risk across all of the crises contexts in which we work. The risk was that millions of people would have been left without support. So it injected resources at a vital moment. Available through our pooled funds across those 18 countries, with 6 of those countries actually starting from 0 in the pooled funds, and 4 of them increasing almost tenfold. So on the second slide, you'll see then how we are delivering that work. Now, there were plenty of legitimate questions about how we were doing this. Could we allocate those funds quickly enough? Could the humanitarian system deliver at that scale? And could we live up to the standards of accountability that we set ourselves and which are rightly demanded of us by our donors and by their taxpayers? And I hope that the data that we'll share with you today, and it's all available for you online, will show that we resoundingly, collectively, as humanitarians, answered yes to all of those questions. As of today, we have $1.71 billion of that funding under implementation across those 18 countries. And with it, we're aiming to reach 22 million people with the US allocation alone. And of course, behind down a little bit more, over 6 million people will have received food assistance with that support. 10.4 million people will be provided with safe and sufficient water. We'll be supporting over 690 health facilities. More than 779,000 households will get direct assistance, one of the fastest, most efficient, most dignified women and girls who are so often on the front lines of these crises. They'll have access to safe spaces. They will get support for those who have survived horrific sexual violence. And of course, women and girls always bear the brunt of that sexual violence. On the next slide, I hope you'll see that we're also working with this allocation and with the generous support of other donors to reform the humanitarian system. To go back to the 4Ds, and I won't test you on the 4Ds right now, but I know you all know them very well. We are defending our values and principles, international humanitarian law, wherever we work, the neutrality, the impartiality of our work, our protection of women and girls. And you'll all have read carefully the global humanitarian overview that we released back in December that describes how we're doing that. We're delivering much more efficiently and effectively against those goals, reducing duplication and bureaucracy and layers between effectively to save the maximum number of lives. That is also, therefore, empowering our local country teams and our extraordinary humanitarian coordinators in the field who are leading such important work. Which partner organizations are delivering and who is having the right results as we seek to reach that target of 87 million lives. We've established that online portal where you can explore all the aspects of that work. To assess where we can improve the delivery of what we are doing. And of course, we've consulted our amazing friends and partners across the humanitarian community, the UN agencies that are so vital to this work, our partner NGOs. And I hope that as we learn that will further enhance the risk oversight, the accountability and impact tracking mechanisms that are such a key innovation of this work, that we will continue our essential work need. And in the Q&A, I'd be happy to elaborate on several areas where over the last 3 or 4 days, we've made progress on those access agreements, including through the work we do with the US. Is in urgent need of help. And of course, just for clarity, we also hope that member states and supporters will continue to support early recovery, resilience, long-term development. I've just returned with this fresh funding, we will save millions of lives. It makes the US our single largest national donor, and this allocation will allow us to accelerate, expand on the progress made, saving lives, and the choices we've made. I can speak for our humanitarians throughout the system in saying that while the challenges are growing, we will not
forms that I think both of our organizations recognize are necessary. Doesn't care about humanitarian or life-saving aid. Nothing could be further from the truth. We've spent countless hours, and I think our teams have gotten to know each other. I mean, Tom's team at OCHA and my team at the thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of work that goes into making these reforms real. And I think there's no shame in admitting that. In fact, service to the people that he serves, and at the same time, we're not responsible to the United Nations. I work for the American people. He works for the American people, no one else, right? And so that doesn't mean that there aren't areas where our overlap. Recognition that the needs are tremendous, particularly in these conflict countries. And what you would see is Congress would give more and more money to humanitarian work, and it wasn't actually reaching the people in delivering life-saving impact. And so when the president came into office, he said, this system is in need of tremendous reform. And everyone focuses on the first stage of that reform, which is cutting a lot of stuff that didn't make sense. And I think there's not been and then we signed that agreement in Geneva. And as Tom said, it was a stressor for the system, certainly. To them, and I think the teams were looking at each other like this isn't going to work. And many in the media, when we announced it, said this was just because, you know, we lacked the capacity to get the money out, or because Tom was desperate for funding. A focus on funding pooled funds, but a different type of pooled funds where we have certain, you know, we've picked the countries intentionally to align. Secretary Rubio said this, even when we're being generous as a humanitarian donor, every single taking the benefits of the pooled funds, which is faster delivery to the entire sector, to best placed local partners. Some of their, you know, services to help the OCHA team put that together. That's a first. I mean, the United States has posted a lot of our foreign assistance obligations on the internet for a long time. The UN has never really done anything like that. So that's a huge innovation. The impact and accountability it to the United States and to our team so we can take action together. You know, we're working with the OIGs on that as well. And so those are huge accountability reforms. But I think what's most important of it, and they've already mapped it against 21.1 million real people that are going to receive life-saving assistance. across all of those different countries in record time. Their time to obligation one of those promises, which is 92% hyper prioritize. I mean, you guys can challenge me on this. I don't think any other major donor in any year has ever had its humanitarian money be 90. Lines with the president's interest, and that's where we get to that country selection. Those country selection questions. I think that's important for both of our systems. I think it's important that there are principles, and we can work together on it, while also allowing us the sovereign right to invest in places where it aligns with our national interest. And so I know that's incredibly, incredibly important. We are adding additional countries, including a couple that you may be interested in. So we still do have bilateral awards with both UN agencies and private organizations, and we're going to be rolling out a series of macro awards going forward as well that sort of cover a lot of the countries that are not in this allocation. Because, and I think this goes to the pooled fund model, we're expanding it to more countries. And I think there were a lot of questions when we did the first one about why did you pick these countries? A lot of it was need, a lot of it was foreign policy. A lot of it was also the capacity to deliver this 4 months in at scale and actually deliver. I think the OCHA team was bringing all of the UN agencies together under the leadership of the humanitarian or resident coordinator in country, hyper prioritizing humanitarian work to actual life-saving action, being accountable, reporting data, focusing on diversion and admitting it, you know, and ultimately being transparent in a way that the UN never was before is something that needs to stay. So we're delighted to be able to support those reform efforts going forward. And we think that this is part of our long-term strategy in the United States for humanitarian assistance. The sector, they don't like certain aspects about it. Some of them are fair, and we hear those complaints. We work with, you know, with OCHA to work with, you know, on some of those issues. I know, for example, there were a lot of questions around the 6 month timeline that OCHA said, you know, all the money had to be out in 6 months. And that's because 4 months in, look at those results, right? And that was really important to prove out the system, and also because of where the system was, you know, last year. But now, you know, responding to some of what the partner feedback has been for this allocation, it's going to be a 12-month cycle. So it's going to be sort of more of an annualized cycle, and recognition that this is now part of our regular budget process and something we're going to be working with Congress to fund every year as a major chunk of the way that we fund humanitarian work around the world. So I look forward to questions, but, you know, this is really a recognition of the work that both the United States and obviously OCHA have been doing all around the world, the success of the model, and a show of continued commitment in these critical reforms. And there's a lot more work to be done. So we'll be doing more of these. But I think it's really important that we started with the results of the last allocation, because too often in these sort of settings, we all pat ourselves on the back and pledge more money. But, you know, the real question is that delivering? And I think that's the challenge that we've made to OCHA. And I know we were talking about this. There was a very, caught a lot of headlines line that we had in our press release in the last one, which said we were challenging UN agencies to adapt, shrink, or die. I'd say OCHA has definitely adapted. It's reformed. And it hasn't grown because they're being efficient, but it's grown in what it's doing. And it's grown 3 times as many resources under pooled fund management and under the HCRC leadership, meeting more people than ever through OCHA supported programs. And it's reformed in a way that honestly has been very impressive to the United States, and and we want to continue to hold Tom accountable for that. But this is a continued show of our investment in this approach, and it's something that's going to be here to stay for us.
Great. So we are now going to take questions. Just a quick note, we will be doing, or rather the New York, from 1 to 1:45, the New York Foreign Press Center will be hosting a briefing from Undersecretary Lewin as well as Undersecretary General Fletcher. That will be on the 10th floor of the US-UN building. So if you have further questions, by all means, check in there. So we're going to do our first question with Valeria.
Thank you so much. On behalf of the United Nations Correspondent Association, thank you for this press conference. It's Valeria Rebecco from ANSA Newswire. Ambassador Waltz, on Middle East, since Operation Epic Fury, millions have been displaced across the region, Iran, Lebanon, Gaza. Simultaneously, the humanitarian supply chain through the Strait of Hormuz have been disrupted, and so the needs increased. Reports indicate the State Department has 5.4 billion in humanitarian funds already appropriated for 2026, but not yet deployed. So can you tell us what is the US plan to respond to this crisis, and when will those funds reach the people who need it? Thank you so much.
I think you just saw $1.8 billion of that money. You saw exactly how we're going to allocate it. So rest assured, all of the money, there's a plan for it, and it's all being allocated against this and our full year plan. So I think the idea that there's money that we're just sitting on, Congress gives you money to spend throughout the year, and we're working, as we talked about, to make it much faster to get to the field. There's $100 million in here for Lebanon specifically. And I know you visited Lebanon a few weeks ago. We talked about it, and they're working very hard to reach the needs in Lebanon. I don't know if you want to talk about the Strait or anything like that. But
Well, I'll just add. So I guess your number is now what, 3.6, right? So I hope you adjust since we just announced 1.8. So that's one piece, but look, that's why you've seen, to your point on the humanitarian aid, I think it's 80 plus, Tom, agencies that I'm aware of, both private, UN and otherwise, that use, for example, the Dubai Free Trade Zone, use those ports, have to transit the Straits of Hormuz. And it's one of many reasons that we've called upon the Iranian government. In fact, in UN Security Council Resolution 2817, 136 nations, a UN record in terms of co-sponsors, called upon the Iranian government to stop attacking civilian commercial shipping and to allow that humanitarian aid to go out to areas in need like East Africa. We just had, as a result of the readout from President Trump and President Xi, another call, an agreement between the United States and China to call upon the Iranian government to demilitarize, to stop militarizing the Straits, to stop tolling shipping in violation of international law, and to come to some type of reasonable conclusion. So not only was it in that Security Council resolution, but in the draft Security Council resolution now, there is specific language to allow humanitarian aid to flow. And I'm fully confident in Undersecretary Lewin will obligate efficiently, transparently, effectively the money that Congress has appropriated.
Thank you very much for doing this briefing, Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. Ambassador Waltz, this was a very important donation from the United States for humanitarian needs. And I can't help but ask you whether there's you said that there are 300 million people who really need aid, and the UN is aimed only at about 85 million. What happens to all of those other people? And is that a realistic target? And just to clarify, Mr. Lewin, because I think where some of us are slightly confused about the timeline. The original 2 billion was for 6 months. And the announcement of the 1.8 billion today is for a year starting now.
The simplest question is that one. So OCHA said the money had to be obligated within 6 months, and that was to sort of kick the sector and say they've got to get it out the door and get it to the field. So there's a different time as they do the pooled fund allocations. There's going to be a little bit more time to assess where the needs are greatest and obligated onto actual projects over a little bit longer of a timeline. So that's why 4 months later, they've gotten almost all of the original 2 billion out the door. It won't be quite as fast, not in the terms of the actual, like once they've identified a project, it'll be super fast, but they'll have a little more time to spread it out over a longer period as needs continue to evolve.
Thanks, Edie. So just very quickly on those three to me. I mean, firstly, I would love to sit here and say that I was going to get the funding to reach those 345 million. I wish that funding was there, but I have to be realistic about what's out there. And so we've given ourselves, on the basis of data and the work our teams have done, a stretch target of reaching 23 billion. I hope we go through that and that we can then reach many, many more than that. But the responsible thing for me to do is to work out what we're likely to get and then heavily prioritize to make sure that that's being spent in the most principled way possible, which means identifying the people in the highest severity, the most urgent cases. I can't justify taking food from them to spend on less higher priority projects. But we can give you, and I can share with you the plans we have for if we receive much, much more. But we've got to start somewhere with that rigor and clarity and honesty about what we're doing. Is it realistic? Call me back at the end of the year and we'll see. I know that we'll do everything. We're busting through those checkpoints. We're busting through those donor meetings. We're working around the clock, people risking their lives out in the field to deliver these outcomes and to get us to that 87 million number. The situation, as Ambassador Waltz has already identified in the Straits of Hormuz, actually makes it harder for us because a lot of the supplies, the food, the fertilizer, the natural gas is held up, which could actually mean that 345 million number in need goes even further up. I've just come back from Somalia and seen the direct risks there. So, this is a difficult world and this is a difficult job, but we're determined to deliver. Finally, on the allocation, I was the one who was very keen that we delivered that first allocation fast for several reasons. The sector was in real jeopardy, and we had to get support out to the front lines very, very quickly. Also, it was a challenge, as Jeremy has said, to all of us to see if we could deliver, and we have delivered, over twice as quickly as we normally do with our allocations. And also, thirdly, and frankly, to demonstrate to the US and to other potential donors that we had a model that could work, in the hope that we would get to this point, this happy point here, where we're hearing about a subsequent allocation. The next one, we've got a bit more space and we can learn some lessons. We can make sure that particularly local organizations have the time they need to put together their applications to this funding and that we can deliver as effectively as possible. But just to be clear, I'm not going to be saying to the sector that we can take our foot off the accelerator here. We have a lot of lives to save this year, and this is a great boost to that effort, but we won't be, I'm afraid, folks, relaxing.
Let me just answer that last one, because I would just want to point out, I would love for you all to be able to go and ask the IRGC, ask the IRGC Navy, ask the Ayatollah why they're responding to our actions built around their nuclear program by attacking humanitarian aid, attacking civilian shipping, attacking ports. So this is squarely on Iran's shoulder. And again, it's why we've had one resolution passed and another one in draft that as of today has 120 co-sponsors calling on Iran to stop attacking civilian shipping and life-saving. That's moving life-saving aid on the regular budget, because I will, look, we've seen, I mean, first, let's just set the record that the most substantial part of the arrears started in 2024 in the last administration. Moving forward, we've seen, well, let's just look at what we're talking about today. We've seen significant reforms in the humanitarian space, pooled warehouses, pooled vehicle fleets, pooled back offices, lower administrative costs. We've seen those reforms move forward, and we're now announcing another tranche of significant funding. On the regular budget side, we saw the first budget cut in the UN's history on its regular budget. We're seeing 3,000 headquarters bureaucrats that will be cut and will push people out into the field. We've seen reforms on the peacekeeping side. As a result, we had 159 million delivered in January, and we will have an additional substantial tranche towards our regular budget coming soon.
Sherwin Briceby, South African Broadcasting. I'll start with Tom Fletcher, and I've got one for you also, Ambassador Waltz, right here in the front. Tom, you were at Chatham House on April 20th, and to quote you, you said, for every day of the Iran conflict, 2 billion is being spent. You say, my entire target for a hyper-prioritized plan is to save 87 million lives is $23 billion. We could have that funding in less than a fortnight of this reckless war, you said. Now, of course, we cannot. You also went on to describe the relationship with the United States as an absolute roller coaster, but that some progress was being made in that relationship. I wonder
So yeah, I mean, you've heard what I've said, and I've said it in this room as well. I wish there was more money being spent on humanitarian action and less money in the world being spent on war. I would love much more of that funding to be going to the plan to help us raise that 23 billion. You can do the maths. I've told you I need 23 billion to save 87 million lives. And I'm sad that a lot of money at the moment is being spent on drones. We're seeing it in all of the crisis areas where we're working. The arms dealers are getting richer at the moment at the expense of the people who I serve, and it's driving up humanitarian needs. But we're here with a piece of good news today about a very significant chunk of US funding that they have chosen to spend on humanitarian action, and I welcome that, as has, of course, the SG. Is it a roller coaster? I mean, at some point, we'll release our memoirs about the last 6 months. Well, longer than 6 months. Yeah, it's an exciting dialogue that we're having, but it's a dialogue that gets results. This is a significant result. The 2 billion allocation has saved millions of lives, and just over the last 72 hours, I'm in touch with US envoys on the Middle East, on DRC, Sudan, on Syria, actually on very practical ways that we can work together to help to save lives in those areas. And so that's a partnership and a dialogue with a key member a key permanent member of the Security Council and a key actor in so many of these regions.
Can I just say something for 30 seconds? We are by far the largest donor to this plan and to the humanitarian sector this year. And so, there are a lot of countries that are sitting on the sidelines and making criticisms of the United States and talking about humanitarian impacts. Many of them are wealthy. Many of them have not shown up for this plan or any other plan. All of the other developed countries have cut, many by much more than us, and they are putting their money towards things that are less hyper-prioritized towards life-saving aid. They're saving social programs at the expense of life-saving aid. And so there are a lot of countries that criticize the actions of President Trump, but when it comes to humanitarian life-saving aid, and you can do all the math, it's visible, and Tom has said it, we are still here as the most generous country in the world.
I can't resist. I mean, frankly, it's just a ridiculous question. Yeah, we can have tough conversations. Reform is difficult. Reform is uncomfortable. Doing things better isn't easy, but the results that we just listed out speak for themselves, period. That's one. Number two, to Undersecretary Lewin's point, finally, after decades of asking, NATO, for example, has increased their defense spending, but they've done a lot of it at the decrease of their aid budgets. So I wonder if our colleagues in Europe are getting those same type of questions. I probably doubt it. And then thirdly, if we want to talk about costs in the Middle East, let's talk about the costs that have been incurred by Hezbollah attacking, not destabilizing Lebanon, attacking its neighbors. Let's talk about the costs of the Iranian-backed Assad regime for decades and decades and the slaughter of the Syrian people. Let's talk about the cost to humanity of the 40 to 50,000 Iranians, not over a period of years, in a weekend. How many machine gun bullets is that from the Iranian regime on its own people? Let's talk about the cost of life-saving aid that's going to be incurred in East Africa. So I'm happy, I don't know where you are, to talk about costs that have been incurred by a genocidal regime, the largest state backer of terrorism, one that United Nations resolution after resolution here in the Security Council has called upon to not seek a nuclear weapon, where we just had snapback provisions of the entire world agreeing with us. And let's talk about the cost of, God help us, if they could hold the world hostage with a nuke. So I'm happy to have that conversation about cost, and I'm thankful that we're arresting this problem before it gets out of control.
One last question from online, then we got to go. Magdalena.
Hi, Magdalena del Valle from Bloomberg News. I'd really love to hear some more details about how the funds are going to be used. I know in December you said they were going to be going to a pool, but is this going to be more earmarked? And then how are you planning or not on attributing future funds? Like, are there some goals that the organization needs to meet in order to guarantee that more money will flow in?
So it's the same model that we pioneered, and as Tom said, they've produced a public dashboard, so you can see exactly where the $2 billion went. It's built on a hyper-prioritized plan, global humanitarian overview, and then our teams went down country by country, sector by sector, targeted it to the life-saving needs. And so it's a pooled fund vehicle. I think we signed that framework agreement. There are requirements around accountability, around impact tracing, about prioritization, about ensuring no diversion, about all those other things. But other than that, it's not. It is supposed to be flexible because we've done all the work to identify exactly what we're spending it on, which is core life-saving stuff.
Yeah, and just to underline that, thanks, Angelina, and to mention the other country that we didn't mention earlier, which is being added to the list, is Central African Republic. I know that Ambassador Bartos was there just recently, and our teams made a very strong case for their inclusion on the list as well. So it's a longer list of countries, but you can find all of that online, and you can see the different sectors that we're supporting, the different organizations we're supporting throughout these efforts. As we described earlier on, we have adapted, and it's not, my one small correction to Jeremy's point, it's not just OCHA that's adapted, it's the humanitarian system, the humanitarian community. Under the leadership of the SG's UN80 initiative. So this is real practical progress, but we can't relax because those needs are out there and we're determined to deliver. Thank you.
Can I just make one more comment on the ultimate way to drive down the people in need, and therefore the cost to save their lives, is to continue with processes for peace, with political processes. And whether that's Azerbaijan, Armenia, DRC, Rwanda, Sudan and the Quad process, Libya, Western Sahara, I can continue going on and on. This administration is driving those processes through, not only through our special envoys, but here in the Security Council. That's how we work. Tom and OCHA and this entire humanitarian sector. If we can't eliminate it significantly reduce it. And we have to tie it. I just wanted to be sure to tie those two things together.
And the president has spent so much time personally on peace. And there's, you know, many of you guys will criticize every little thing. Oh, this deal has stalled or everything else like that. He is dedicating a lot of time and attention and political attention on peace processes in places that for a long time have been forgotten, like Sudan, which is the world's greatest humanitarian crisis. I mean, not to get overly political here, how much time did Joe Biden spend on Sudan as that crisis was getting out of control? How much time, I'm serious, not a lot, as the needs kept on growing and growing and growing. So they spent more and more poorly targeted money year after year and said, that's, you know, how we're going to fix it. So President Trump is focusing on peace, which is the root of it all, while also focusing on the humanitarian sector at the back end.
Thanks, everyone.
you.